Okay, you ready to start? We're live streaming as well. So we're going all over the world. So I'm George Sparks, CEO of the museum. Welcome here. This is awesome to see all of you out here like this. This is fabulous. Talking about climate and the economy. It was interesting today out in that where you had drinks, we had about 70 folks and we had a presentation from a paleontologist about the day the asteroid hit the Earth and what it was like then. Turns out it was about 10 to 15 degrees C warmer. It was less tropical kind of thing. Very, very different it is today. So the Earth goes through these cycles. We just shouldn't be the ones driving those cycles. And Colorado right now, I think even people that don't necessarily believe that climate is changing, they understand now that something is changing here. It feels different than it has in the past. I had to visit Denver folks out the other day, and I was joking with them that Colorado's brand used to be Coors beer, spring mountain water, snow, et cetera. Now we're going to be known as Colorado. Welcome to Colorado, the windy wildfire hellhole. And that's not a very good brand for a lot of reasons. So our job is to keep that from getting any worse and to make it better. And it has real effect on the economy. I mean, who would have imagined that the Marshall Fire would have destroyed 1,000 homes? That's just beyond comprehension. We have a place in Breck, and I used to think that if we cut a couple, 20 feet of trees in front of the place, it wouldn't burn. But now I've come to the conclusion that it will burn someday. I mean, I think that's just the reality. If you live around here, if you live long enough, especially if you live outside the city, it's likely your place will burn. So our job is to keep that from happening if we can. Now, this will, if humans have been around a couple 100,000 years, Homo sapiens, this will be the largest collective action ever undertaken by humanity to evolve from carbon-based fuels to some sort of new future. It'll be as big as the Industrial Revolution, but we're going to do it a lot faster than the Industrial Revolution happened. And to me, it's really exciting. I think there are going to be so many really cool things that come of it. How many of you remember the first time you saw a browser? How many of you know what a browser is here? You know what a browser is? So I remember the first time I saw a browser, I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. That could probably be useful in some ways. And now we've gone to where we live our lives on this technology. And I think that'll be the way it is with energy. We're going to have so many really new, cool ways to do things that will be better for the Earth and better for us in the long term. So I want to thank all of our panelists here tonight, and especially Kristen Eulenbrock, who's the director of the Institute for Science and Policy, who's going to lead us tonight. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kristen.
Thank you, George. Appreciate that. I also want to recognize and acknowledge our partners in putting this together, environmental entrepreneurs known as E2. We have their executive director here, and of course, Susan has been a wonderful co-host and partner. So a huge thanks to them as well for helping us gather tonight. You have all of our speakers' bios. There's a printout out there. So we're not going to spend time on a bio because we know we're standing between you and networking and food. And there are wonderful ideas and comments. So we want to jump into conversation real quickly. But this idea of climate and our economy, right? I was talking with someone about this event recently, and they're like, I wonder what this conversation would have been about 10 years ago or 20 years ago, right? Thinking about how do these two things, these two major systems absolutely have impact on each other. And things are driving certain things and very quickly. Would this conversation have sounded very differently? And I absolutely think it would have from where we are today. But I'm thrilled to hear everyone speaking. So let me just introduce quickly my panel who is sitting here left to me. I know their heads are up there in not the right order because there was I let them choose their seats. So no, you guys are fine. So I have Bob Keefe sitting here right here next to me. And I think you all saw this in the email. Hopefully he has a new book that was just released. There are copies out there and he will sign them after tonight. So make sure if you're interested in picking up his book to come talk to him and see that. He's the executive director of Environmental Entrepreneurs. Sitting directly to his left is a state senator of ours, Senator Chris Hansen. He leads our appropriations committee here in our state legislature. He's also vice chair of the Joint Budget Committee. He's an engineer and a scientist at heart, even though he went to the world of politics. And he does a lot here in our state, for those of you who are familiar with some of his bills he's passed. So I'm grateful to have him here this evening. Next to that is Suzanne Taygan. Suzanne is the Associate Director at the Center for New Energy Economy at Colorado State University. She's had a wonderful career, including a lot of stints at NREL. And I've had a little bit of an opportunity to work with her recently when we've been talking about the just transition here in the state. And I'm excited to have you here this evening. And last but not least is Trent Yang. Trent is the president and founding partner, just founder is probably the best way to say it, of Galway Sustainable Capital, a really thoughtful investment firm looking at both the sustainable and environmental and social impacts of investing, and will bring a lot to this conversation. So thank you for being here tonight. Good. Okay, we're going to open it up with letting each of our panelists just provide a thought on, it's 2022. We will end up talking about some important legislation that passed, but I'd be curious, beyond that important piece of legislation, this is a big topic, climate in our economy. Like, what's the one thing that you find yourself talking a lot about? You keep coming back to and talking with a lot of people about. Open up that conversation. I think we're going to get some 4 very different answers to that. Bob, do you want to start?
So there was some legislation that was passed.
Yeah,
Is that true?
We'll talk about it.
Is that true? Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you all for being here. How cool is it to be together again?
Yeah.
Yeah. And thank you for the Institute and to the museum for hosting this fantastic event. Thanks to my colleague, Susan Nadell, for all the hard work she put into this. And really, thank you all for being here. The thing that we've been talking about is exactly the topic that we're here for tonight, is the economics of climate change. And like most of you all, I looked at climate change as an environmental issue. I looked at it as a social issue. I looked at it as a health issue for so long, and rightly so, because it is all of those things. But climate change now is an economic issue. There's no doubt about it anymore. Last year alone, we had $150 billion worth of damage to our economy nationally from climate-related disasters. Here in Colorado, it's something like about $3 billion a year for the past average over the past 5 years. Last year alone, something like $7 billion when you add in the horrific Marshall Fire and drought, winter storms, et cetera. And all of this is hitting all of us in the pocketbook. So climate change has become an economic issue. Certainly the direct cost of those disasters is huge, but homeowners insurance up 40% in a decade's time. We're now paying more for everything from cornflakes to chicken because of droughts, because of flooding. We're all paying more in our taxes to pay for more firefighters, to rebuild military bases that were hammered by hurricanes on the East Coast and flooding in the West, in the Midwest and elsewhere. So when you ask about what are people talking about or what are we talking about, it's the realization that climate change is now an economic issue.
Yeah, just a couple opening thoughts. I think I quit my job and ran for public office to work on climate change. And I had come to the conclusion about 8 years ago that action at the federal level was going to be slow or non-existent. And my prediction 8 years ago was pretty good until a couple of weeks ago. And we're going to dive into the IRA here in just a second. And I look forward to talking about kind of how that bill is going to play out in Colorado. But as I said, I quit my job. I ran for the state house, now in the state Senate, and I wanted to work on climate change. It was sort of the thing that was driving me to get more involved in public service. And I think I can safely say, and I see tons of friends in the room who have been part of this effort over the last 7-8 years, Colorado is back in a leadership position because of what we've been able to do at the state level. And in the absence of federal action for many years, Colorado has stepped up along with another half dozen states you could point to. And we are trying to very methodically as fast and as smart as we can decarbonize the Colorado economy. And we have clear goals, and we've started filling that in with sector by sector legislation. And that's been really exciting to be a part of, right? It's electricity, and then it's transportation, and then now we're moving on to buildings. and the ag sector and upstream oil and gas, and just piece by piece of that emissions pie, we are making huge progress. And it's been so much fun to be a part of that work.
Well, that's so great. Thank you for all the great work over the last 8+ years, Senator Hansen. And I would echo what you're saying, which was it's been a long journey for, I think, all of us here on the panel and many of you down here in the audience. I remember when I started doing investing in sustainability and renewable energy, 2006, they didn't even call it climate tech, which is the new word for it. It used to be clean tech. And what I love about what's happening today is that it's no longer just a moral imperative that we do this, but it's an economic opportunity. It's the numbers that are out there are mind-blowing, right? We need to spend on the order of $10+ trillion per year for the next 25 years to make this transition, right? And if I put that into perspective, everybody have heard now software is eating the world, right? All of our lives are run digitally. The entire world market for software and software services is $1 trillion a year, right? This is a 10x opportunity versus software. So yes, it's an economic issue. Yes, it hurts pocketbooks. It's challenging, but it's a huge opportunity for all of us, especially the young people. I think, if you're coming out of college, you want something to do, it's never been a better time.
Yeah, I don't think I disagree with anyone. I think I agree with all of you. And I think when I think about what I talk about most with people that I don't work with, my neighbors, my family, they ask me, are we doing enough on climate change? Can we stop climate change with what we're doing today? And we can't, right? We can't stop climate change. We can lessen the impacts of climate change. And that's what we need to focus on. We need to focus on making sure that this hockey stick curve that we've been seeing comes down, right? And that the people in our communities, really locally, are not as hurt as they have been, or they could be if we don't take measures to stop this. I live in Louisville, Colorado, where we had the Marshall Fire in December, and we're of course still suffering from that, but that was one of the horrific natural disasters that we've seen. And while we can't totally stop this, I think efforts like Senator Hansen was talking about at the state really help. I mean, the electric vehicles, the renewable energy, shutting down power plants that have harmful emissions, all those things we're making strides. And then the IRA that we're going to talk about is a huge step in the right direction. I think we can also take measures to prevent more climate change. And some of these things that I just mentioned, will do that by shutting down harmful emitting power plants and making sure that we take care of the people who work there, of course. We'll talk about that too. And then the adaptation part of this, right? So we have to learn to adapt to our situation, and we have to make sure that we don't think we're just going from one thing to another, because the another, as we all know, right, it is going to keep changing. The world keeps changing, and so we have to adapt as it changes. And so I think it's just such a complex question, but we have to keep going. We have to keep doing what we're doing. We can't stop climate change, but we can definitely make it easier for communities. We can build them better. We can make them more resilient. And all the little things that we're doing do matter.
Thank you. All right, so everyone's talking about the IRA, but I actually, before I want to ask my panelists, I want to ask you all here in the audience as a show of hands. I'm going to make this a binary, so you're going to be forced to raise your hand for an either or. As much as I try to do both and thinking and break down some of this binary thinking, I'm going to force you into it. Because we're going to talk a little bit about policy. So show of hands, I'd be curious. We're going to give you two options. Do people think the most effective policy tools we have right now are carrots or sticks? So if you're in the carrot category and incentive category, raise your hand. All righty. Any stick people in here? Okay, sorry. Carrots are winning. So we're talking about incentives, right? That leads, okay, good. You all are leading us into
The Inflation Reduction Act. We won't have to spend time talking about the title of it here, but that's okay. Our panelists have been referring it to the IRA. If you haven't been following the news in the past week, it is a major bill that's passed that has a big climate funding and energy funding portion to it. A lot of investments through both grants and tax credits and other incentives. So I want to dive into it, but before I say that, we can call it the IRA. I've been calling it IRA in honor of Ira Flato. And just like IRA has a lot of connotations, right? I know, right? I think we got to take back this acronym. I'm going to call it IRA, and you all can laugh at me, but the Inflation Reduction Act, it's a pretty big bill. Let's focus on the climate and energy piece of it. There's a lot of cool stuff in there, right? It's $370 some billion, right? Depending on how you count it. We're going to go here. Maybe we're going to start with Bob first, and we'll just kind of go down the row again, or unless someone wants to chime in, but something in that bill that you were really excited to see. What stood out to you? What do you think our audience should be aware of?
Well, I think first of all, we ought to be aware that this is the biggest climate policy we've ever seen. And it's been a damn long time coming. I was talking to somebody earlier, and the first climate legislation that was ever introduced in the Senate was in 1985 by this younger senator named Joe Biden. And the Senate has not passed, even come close to passing a climate-related bill since then. The House has done a couple of things, the Senate has not. So the mere fact that we finally got the political will to do the right thing is huge in itself. But as you mentioned, $370 billion worth of investments in clean energy and climate solutions. That's a huge number. The most we've ever invested in clean energy in this country was during the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, when we had $90 billion in clean energy investments. And what did we get out of that? We got 100,000 clean energy projects. We weatherized a million homes. We recapitalized the DOE loan guarantee program that spun off companies like this little thing called Tesla that exists in part because it's got a $350 million loan back then and revolutionized the auto industry. So what we're talking about is something in huge orders of magnitude of that. And certainly tax credits matter, the direct investments matter. But one of the things that's really important here that sometimes gets overlooked is the market certainty that businesses in clean energy now have. I was just talking to one of our great E2 members, Michael Rucker, wherever he is. He's been in the wind business for decades now. And he was reminding me that the longest visibility he had previously when it came to tax credits for wind was about 4 years. Well, this locks it in for 10 years. And there's nothing that businesses need more than visibility on the marketplace as they're planning their future, as they're hiring new employees, as they're making more new investments. And so the market certainty is something that's really important here.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a couple quick thoughts. The bill will lower the cost of climate tech roughly by 40% across a bunch of different categories: hydrogen, EVs, CCS, sustainable aviation fuel, heat pumps, batteries, long list. And on average in those categories, we're going to push things down by 30, 40%. And those are the carrots. I mean, it was a carrot bill. This bill is less than half the size it should have been, in my opinion. But it's a huge step, and we need to celebrate that. We need to build on it, and it's going to help us to run faster. And that's super exciting. Super exciting. And it's as we were joking before, a long time coming. Not funny, not a joke. It's a long time coming, and we got here. I would just quickly add one of the things that was on the cutting room floor that I care a lot about. It was the transmission tax credit. Did not make it into the final bill. We badly need to upgrade and modernize our power grid. We cannot reach our clean energy goals in the West, in the country, in the world, without a really robust and reliable transmission grid. That's what's going to let us get all this great wind and solar and batteries and other climate tech to the final customer. do it in a really cost-effective way. So that part I was disappointed in. The scale wasn't quite where I'd hoped it would be, but still a massive step forward.
I'll just add to what you were just talking about with the transmission system. We're also not going to get to energy security, right, if we don't upgrade our grid. So just thinking about that. So I'm excited about so many different pieces of it. And when you look back to the early days of the census in the 1900s till now, there's a 10-year census where it's more in depth that some people take, and people, Democrats and Republicans and everybody in between and on whatever side, agree on clean air and clean water. Those are things that they want. So I'm excited that in this act is the methane emission reduction from methane. And it's a really potent greenhouse gas. And I think we really needed this. So that's the clean air part, one of the clean air parts. There are a lot of clean air parts. And then water, there will be $4 billion spent on the Colorado River Basin. And as you all know, because you live here, right, water is so important, and it's, going to be as important as oil. It's going to be as important as gold. I mean, we can't live without water. So I'm really excited about the water piece. Sorry, I'm really excited about the water piece. I'll just go back and say what I just said. No, I'm just kidding. So air and water. I'm talking about air and water, clean air and clean water. And then just to add on the end here, I'm really excited about the consumer parts of it, because people will see cheaper electricity bills from the rebates that they will get when they buy a new heat pump, when they buy a new solar panel, when they buy energy efficiency or energy efficient appliances. These are real dollars that people are going to see in their pockets right away. So those savings will decrease their electricity bills for a long time to come, and I think that's really important to consumers.
Yeah, this is an amazing bill. I would say, I would echo Bob's comments around certainty. As an investor, even though we're optimists and we're risk takers, having that certainty, I will tell you, will unlock billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars into this market. I think that's the biggest carrot out there, is getting private capital to work here. And hopefully this is, there will be a 10, 100x multiplier with private capital coming in to support this transition. If you take a step back and think about, what do we need to do in order to make this transition? 27% of the carbon emission comes from transportation. That was a big part of the bill, right? How do we get more people into electric vehicles faster? Check. 20+% is from electricity and energy use. Huge part of the bill is on renewable energy and energy tax credits to continue the transition over the last 20 years. We needed that. What's the third big winner out of the IRA? I think the third big winner was carbon capture and sequestration, right? We will not be able to clean up everything that we need to clean up in the time frame that we need to do it in. And so inevitably, we will need some carbon capture and sequestration, whether that's point source on industrial applications, whether that's direct air capture, all of the above, right? And carbon capture and sequestration got a big carrot from a tax credit perspective. They doubled the amount, they extended the runway. I think that was really great. And then they had a lot of great things for buildings and building energy efficiency. You talked about a lot of the credits for individuals to electrify your home and make your home more energy efficient. The one part that I would say I think we didn't do enough, in addition to transmission, is the intersection of food and climate. Food, depending on how you look at it, food and climate, food contributes about 15 to 20% of our carbon emissions on an annual basis. We really didn't do a lot. There was some around, promoting regenerative farming, which is great. But there's a lot of things we can do around alternative protein, making better farming practices, et cetera. So I think that was a miss in the IRA. But overall, I would say it hit, 80% of the things that we needed to hit. It's going to get us to, by different measures, 60 to 80% of our target for getting to net zero in a timely frame. So, let's pat ourselves on the back. Right?
Well, let me pick up on that because I was curious about others' opinions on this bill and if it is actually going to. We have a little ping in our audio, just so you all know, talking to our tech people. Are we going to reach our climate? Is this helping us reach our climate goals? Because there are absolutely key things missing, and we're going to have challenges with transmission, integration of our grid with renewables and demand for electricity, and this bill does a lot, and there's projections of its, I think is it 40% reduction by 2050? Is that right? From 2005, 2030, excuse me. Yes, 2030, 44% reduction by, that's 8 years from 2005 levels. And we're on track in a lot of areas, but are we going to be reaching our climate goals and targets? Is this getting us there? There are things missing that I think are critical.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could talk about several of the missing pieces, but the thing I find really exciting is, to stay optimistic, is that this is going to accelerate cost decreases in these categories, right? We're going to get scale. We're going to have private capital flowing with that certainty that we just talked about, and that is going to accelerate the slope and the ability to lower costs in each of these categories, and that as a positive feedback loop. And so this first step is terrific. And I think the other thing we haven't spent much time talking about yet, which I think ties in really closely with the work that you and your colleagues do, how does this translate into jobs? This is a jobs bill at its heart, right? You can't outsource somebody putting a heat pump in your house or getting solar panels on your roof and all the other great things in this bill. And if you look closely at the EV construction, it is going to require supply chains that are much more North American based. It's going to take some time to get there. And you've probably seen some of that in the papers, like, oh, we're not there right now. It's going to take several years as we adjust our supply chains. But that is the other part of the bill that I think is super positive, is that we are investing in ourselves right now. This is not a bill that's going to drive massive investment in far-flung supply chains. It is going to move a lot of that back into North America and our friends, especially in Canada, with some of the key resources there. That is, I think, has been undertold part of this story. And those are going to be very positive feedback loops for our economy. And I think we'll build more support for what comes next, right? I sort of started with, I wish we would have done a bit more, but this is a great way to build momentum and political support for what we're going to need as we get to 25, 26, 27. And when hundreds of thousands of people are getting great jobs in climate tech, that in and of itself builds more political support for the next steps we have to take.
I think we should stay on the jobs conversation. I think our whole panel is going to have something to say here. So yeah, Bob, please.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I would say the answer to your question is yes, we are going to get there. So we have a goal in this country to reduce our emissions by 50 to 52% by 2030. That's what science tells us we need to do. This bill will get us 90% of the way there. But we can't think of any piece of legislation as the end all, and that's going to solve all the problems and everything. We got to realize the market signal that is sent by this and what private industry does. And, before I do what I do today, I spent about 25 years as a journalist. I know I don't look that old, but I am that old. I spent about 25 years as a journalist, and a lot of that was covering the technology industry. And I distinctly remember sitting in a room with other journalists and Steve Jobs back when, and him saying, someday, you guys might remember this, someday you're going to have 1,000 songs in your pocket. And hey, someday you're going to be taking pictures with your cell phone. And we wrote this down as skeptical journalists and said, what is this guy smoking? I remember sitting with the Google guys, and the Google guys saying, someday you're going to be able to find anything that's ever been written or published or painted from any computer in any place in the world. And we were thinking, okay, why would we even want to do that? We got a library, we got a phone book. Yeah. I remember sitting with Jeff Bezos, and Bezos saying back when he was just trying to run a bookstore online, saying, someday you're going to be able to buy anything and everything off of my website, including dog food. I don't know why Bezos was always hung up on selling dog food online, but I distinctly remember that. And we were like, okay, we'll figure out this book thing first, you know? But look how quickly those technologies have changed our lives. Look how quickly they permeated our economy and everything we do. I really believe that clean energy, clean vehicles, energy efficiency are at the stage where those things were back when I was writing about them not too long ago, 15 years ago or so. And then let's talk about jobs real quick, I think. Sorry to hog the mic here.
That's okay.
A quick guess. How many people work? How many people do you all think work in clean energy in America? Any wild guesses? If you're not with E2, because you should know this stuff. 10 million, that's a lot. Do I hear 11? Do I hear 11 million? 10 million is a lot. 3.2 million people work in clean energy in America, including about 65,000, I think, here in Colorado. Several studies that have come out since the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act say we're going to add about another 1.5 million jobs. And that's huge. And one of the things that we need to talk about next is what I was talking to my new friend, Susan, from the Workforce Board. We got to figure out how to train people to do these jobs. So that's going to be another big challenge. But we are on the right path. We're going to create a lot of jobs. We're going to drive a lot of investments, a lot of growth, and a lot of technologies that we don't even know yet. And through those technologies and through those jobs, we are definitely going to meet our goals.
Suzanne.
So I'll add that before I joined the Center for the New Energy Economy, I worked at the National Renewable Energy Lab, and one of my focuses was on the wind power workforce. And a new report just came out about how the wind power workforce and the wind power industry is having trouble finding qualified workers. And so they are actually looking at European and other workers to hire them to do, the wind projects here in the US, because we don't have qualified workers trained in the US. We don't have enough of them. So there are jobs in renewable energy, from social science to we need lawyers, we need construction workers, we need electricians, we need everybody. We need bureaucrats. We need so many people in the electric generation workforce, the new workforce and energy workforce and transportation. There's so many jobs, and there's really room for everyone. And I know at the National Renewable Energy Lab, there is this report on the wind power workforce and the difficulty hiring, but then there's a great report from the US Department of Energy called the US Energy and Employment Report that'll tell you how many people are working in each industry, what they're doing in each industry, and then it goes by state. There are 8,000 people, more than 8,000 people in Colorado that work in wind generation. There's more than 7,000 in wind. There are more than 8,000 in solar. And so it also talks about coal and natural gas, and it goes through the gamut. There are always the most people in energy efficiency. That's the most jobs in the clean energy sector. And then of course we have a lot of oil and gas workers in Colorado as well, but we need training for these folks. We need training at the community college level. We need internships, we need apprenticeships. We need training at the graduate student level, and then we need training at the 4th through 8th grade level. That's where we really get people interested. We get kids interested in what they could maybe do in their future. So let's get them interested in, at that level, and then keep going. We can have student competitions like they do have now with, I know they have electric vehicle competitions, they have solar competitions and wind competitions, they have hydro competitions. So there are a lot of great things that are happening where we can involve the future workforce, and we have to keep funding these, and they have to be all across the country. There certainly are places like in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic where they're really looking to train the offshore wind workforce. We have one offshore wind farm in this country, and it is off the coast of Block Island, which is off the coast of Rhode Island. And it's a beautiful place, but it only has 5 wind turbines. And the wind turbines were, a lot of the parts were imported because we haven't done offshore wind before. But the substructures that go actually into the sea were built in Louisiana. And a company did that had built structures for oil and gas rigs before that. So we can transform the companies, from what they had been doing to the new clean energy economy. And so I think that piece is really important. And there are states that are taking the lead in this. And like Senator Hansen said, states are really leading in this effort to, and in this case, it's educate the workforce, of the future.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple words on jobs. If you guys want to make a difference, get involved. There's a ton of jobs out there. I can tell you that our companies just can't find people, right? And these are high-paying, well-paying jobs that's happening today, and it's going to get accelerated because of the IRA. But to bring it back to your original question around, are we going to get there? It's a little bit of a loaded question. I think probably if we polled the audience here, there means a lot of different things for everybody. We're certainly not going back to where we were, right? I think to me, the great thing about this act was, we were on a pathway to potentially 3.5, 4+ degree change. And if you talk to scientists, that gets us into an area where that could be a runaway change, right? And with this act and with coordination around the globe, I think we're now looking at potentially containing this change to 2 degrees, 2.5 degrees. And while that's not great for certain parts of the globe and for certain populations, certainly a lot better than 4 degrees. So I would say, this is the first step, right? Or maybe the third step for many of us here. And but it's a 100-step journey, right? We've still got a long ways to go.
I like that. Thank you. Go
Before
ahead.
we get off jobs,
Yeah.
I just want to talk a little bit about, because I've been doing some work in coal communities
Yeah,
where the coal miners and coal plant operators and also the indirect jobs that are associated with those will go away as the coal plants close in Colorado and elsewhere. And so there are a lot of different things that the federal government is doing and that this IRA is doing. You're welcome. Is doing to help support the coal communities and make sure that they are not left behind, right? So we're working on diversifying economies in Craig and Hayden, Colorado, and they got a grant from the Commerce Department, which wasn't from IRA. This was through a different mechanism, but there is something called the Interagency Working Group on Coal and Power Plant Communities, and that is 11 federal agencies working together. And the director is the director of the National Energy Technology Lab, that's known as the Fossil Lab. It's a lab of the Department of Energy. And they're working really hard to actually go into coal communities and do listening sessions. They just did one today and heard from a lot of the Navajo Nation. And really importantly, hear what people need to transform their economies. Because if coal goes away, that might be half of their revenue, right? Their local revenue. It might be more than half of their revenue. In Craig, Colorado, it was about half of their revenue came from coal. And so it's not just the jobs, it's not just that the culture and that the people might leave, it's the revenue for the town. How are they going to keep those schools going? And now, thankfully, there is support and there is resilience built into these communities to help them diversify their economies. And it's not, there's this big spectrum of environmental justice and energy justice, right? So part of it is the coal workers, and then part of it is the underserved communities that have been underserved for so long. Where we've put energy generation plants, we've put electricity generation plants like coal plants or natural gas plants, and the emissions have been terrible around those places. We have the Suncor refinery issues here in Colorado, in the Denver area, and I think with the Inflation Reduction Act and with other pieces of legislation, also the infrastructure law, there is help for communities. And I don't want to move on from jobs without talking about how important it is. Inclusion is always, needs to be intentional. And so we need to have these communities at the table when we're making plans for them, for their location. The people who live locally and host
the generation facilities need to be brought into the conversation. Maybe they can get some benefit, even if their electricity is being exported. You know, in Wyoming, there aren't that many people there, but there's a lot of wind. Have you ever been there? It's really windy. So why not capitalize on this wind that they're going to send to Vegas, or they're going to send to Portland or LA, right? And maybe that community, though, can benefit somehow. Maybe they can have a storage facility there, or get some of the electricity, or maybe they can co-own some of the facility and you know, earn money on each megawatt hour generated. There are a lot of solutions like this that we can think of. And so when we think about jobs, I want to also think about inclusion. Yeah. Thank you. I did not want to move off this because I think it's an important topic. And so thank you for making it personal, right? Because we are talking about markets driving things. We're talking about the economy, but a lot of this comes down to different cultures and values that people have. And, you know, I've got a panel up here who is very pro, you know what I mean, renewable and solving our climate. And that is not necessarily what we see across America, right? And so this kind of thinking about communities, thinking about certain jobs in communities and the values that they hold, and that friction that we start to see when it comes down to on the ground change, whether that's behavior change or culture change. And I think what's fascinating is, of course, when you look at how markets can change and what can lead and what can follow from that. But you know, Suzanne, let me say with you and others, like, what are some of those stories that you're seeing about where those friction points are as we think about change and transition, right? George alluded to this. Transitions are hard, they're messy, they're complicated. You all are very positive, and I love that. And I would love the optimism. Let's keep that. But there is friction in this system, particularly when it comes down to individuals' behavior change. I mean, where is that coming out for you? What is, you know, where are those focus and pinch point areas that keep you up at night? And someone can start, or Suzanne, you can keep going, but I would love to hear some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a super important part of what we've been tackling in this transition at the Capitol. And my first year in the legislature, I introduced a bill that would create a financing mechanism for some of these transition programs. And that was in 2017. It passed the House, it died in the Senate. And I brought that back in 2019, and we got it done that year. And for the first time, and I think Colorado is a leader among the states on this, we had explicit financing mechanisms to help address transition issues and environmental justice issues and climate justice issues. And it's Hayden and it's Craig, and it's all the other places in the state where this transition is happening. We now have an office that's focused on it. We now have a way to go after federal grants in a really organized way. So we are far from perfect on this. I don't sit up here saying we got it all right, because we have not. But through the hard work of a lot of folks in this room, and you know, just confronting it, not putting our head in the sand, not ignoring it, I think Colorado is in a better spot than most of our neighboring states. And it's dealing with it up front and creating a clear financing mechanism to tackle it. And the great news here is that this transition can ultimately finance itself. I mean, the point is that we are going to be generating savings. What does that look like? Well, right now, a coal plant in Colorado is about $35 to $40 a megawatt hour, roughly. Wind and solar, new projects with storage, $20 to $25. You know, so there's savings here that are being generated over time for ratepayers that can help us pay for some of these externalities, if I can use that word, the economics term. But these are real people and real communities and real schools and real teachers, and we cannot forget that. And again, we have not been perfect in Colorado, but I think we took a huge step in that direction to tackle those tough issues.
Yeah, one of the things I want to just talk about, I have a couple points here. One is this is difficult. It's a hard transition we're making, right? Look at what's happening in Europe, right? Europe was so far out ahead of us in terms of green energy and supporting solar, et cetera. And now they're having, you know, electricity. Imagine paying $1,000 a month for your electricity bill and for your natural gas bill, right? That's what France and Germany and other European countries are going to be going. I mean, of course, there's externalities there because of the war, et cetera. But it shows how difficult, you know, these policy transitions are. We're not We can't imagine every scenario out there. And I also think like, let's not point fingers, right? Let's, I have, one of my portfolio companies does carbon capture and sequestration. We're hiring a lot of people from oil and gas industries because there's a lot of relevant skill sets that's doing that. One of my friends who started a geothermal company just raised $140 million this week. Half of their hires are from oil and gas industry, right? So let's take what we have and take those skill sets and let's make it work, and let's repurpose that. But I think, back to your point, Suzanne, the, climate justice, what we're able to do, we're changing the whole economy here, right? I mean, just take transportation as an example. We're going to electrify everything first and foremost. And in the process of doing that, we're going to be able to have all sorts of new modalities of transportation, micro transportation with electric bicycles, with small electric vans that can come and go. You can call them like Uber. There's a company called Circuit that's doing this on the East Coast, and they're basically like Uber, except they're partnering with local communities. And they're like a bus that you can call, right, to ride from where you are to Walmart or to the beach or to the mountains. And so that gives us a lot of opportunity to address, economic inefficiencies. Where do we put charging stations, right? Where do we put bicycles? Where do we put cars? And I think there's a ton of work we can do collaborating public-private partnerships in addressing these issues as we make these changes.
So I was on a statewide radio show in West Virginia about a month ago, right in the thick of all of the debate over the bill. And this was right after Senator Manchin said he was pulling out, and right before he said that he was back in. So I take full credit for getting him in the right direction. But it was interesting because I went on this show, and it's the Hoppy Kercheval show, which is Joe Manchin's media outlet of choice because it's what everybody listens to in West Virginia. And I went on there with the host, and he said, "Now, Bob, before you start talking, I hope you're not going to tell us that we're all going to work in solar and we're all going to drive electric vehicles and all that kind of stuff, because we've heard that before, and it's not true. You're just going to be lying to us." And I said, "Well, listen, I'm not going to lie to you, Hoppy. What I will tell you is this: you guys have been sold a bill of goods for a long time. Yes, you were supposed to all be working in solar and wind, and yes, coal was going to be coming back and powering our economy again. We know those things didn't happen. We have to be realistic about it, and we have to be truthful about it. There's a ton of people who are going to be out of work as part of this transition. But here's the deal. When you strip away the technology, when you strip away what we're talking about, what we're actually talking about is energy jobs. And who better to work in energy jobs than people in the energy industry? It's kind of like, I don't want my brain surgeon to come from a grocery store. These are the people that know how to do this stuff, but we need to figure out how to empower them and to train them and to get them the funding in the right communities to put these folks to work. And they built our economy once before, and they can help do it again. I'll mention one other thing, and that's about equity. So my organization, E2, has been tracking clean energy job growth for more than 10 years. We help the DOE get started with the user report. And what we now know is that clean energy has a diversity problem. 90%, I think, 79%, I think, of people who work in clean energy are white folks, and they're males. Women make up about 50% of our nation's workforce. In clean energy, they make up about 27%. Blacks and African Americans make up something like 14 or 16% of our nation's workforce. They make up about 8% of the clean energy workforce. One of the good things about the Inflation Reduction Act is that it specifically targets funding into LMI communities, communities of color, and hopefully we'll start to get some of the advantages that other folks have had in this country into the communities that deserve them and need them more than others. I mean, right now, solar and wind is the cheapest power available. Electric vehicles are the most cost-effective vehicles there are. And everybody wants them because not too many people want to pay 5, 6, 7, where I come from, $8 a gallon of gas sometimes. And energy efficiency, whether we're talking about LED lighting or high efficiency HVAC systems or Energy Star appliances, can save people money with every single monthly electric bill. What this legislation does is make those things more affordable, more available to more Americans. And we need to get it implemented because we need to do those things for a lot of reasons.
Susan, before you jump, I'm just gonna say, I can't believe Bobby took credit for passing the IRA because I was gonna do that. We're funding the first greenhouse in West Virginia. So we're showing them that there can be great sustainability jobs, but we can both take credit.
Hold your thought, everyone. I put this slide up. I apologize. I should have did it earlier. If you want to ask a question, because I do want to hear some questions and try to work in from the audience, and you want to pull out your phones, you can ask questions in here, upvote, downvote, not downvote, upvote other people's questions. And I'll try to pull in some of your all's questions in this conversation, but we're going to probably wrap up about 5 or 10 minutes. But wanted to make sure you all had a chance to get some questions, and that's what this slide is for. Suzanne, please.
I just wanted to talk about one of the really big challenges that we face is that climate change is happening so fast and we need to act on it really fast. But when we work with the communities that we've been talking about who don't necessarily agree that we need to go full throttle into climate change mitigation and adaptation, it's a very slow process, right? Because you have to build trust. And trust building takes a lot of visits and it takes a lot of time and getting to know people and sitting on their front porch or, they don't necessarily trust you if you come from the outside and just say, hi, I'm from Boulder, Colorado, and I really want to talk to you about this rural community, which makes perfect sense that they don't trust you. And so it takes a really long time, but we don't have a really long time. So that is one of the main challenges. So if any of you have suggestions, when you ask your question, you can also tell me what can we do about that challenge? That would be great. And then I wanted to mention there was a program called Solar Ready Vets. And I don't know if it still exists, but it was a program that looked at veterans who came back from the military and their job skills were listed, and then the solar job skills were listed so that they didn't have to go through all the training that a solar technician or solar manager or solar scientist or whatever needed to go through, because they've already been through some of that training. So they kind of listed their job skills and the solar job skills. And they said, okay, actually, this is not going to take you, 6 months. This is actually only going to take you 4 weeks because you've already been through these things. And there are a lot of things we can do like that, where we sort of do skills mapping and people can go from one career to another without having to go through the entire training process. They don't have to get another bachelor's degree or do, 3 other internships or something like that. There are, really good training programs like that. And then Senator Hansen mentioned Colorado and what we've done on environmental justice. And I thought, if it's okay, I'll just talk about a couple of other states that are good examples. I want to start with Oregon, because in 1997, way back then, Oregon adopted an environmental justice policy, and now they have an environmental justice task force, but they've been thinking about these issues, and they passed legislation to think about these issues a really long time ago. They have an online mapping tool for how communities are impacted by health disparities from environmental issues. A lot of other people also now, a lot of other states now have online mapping tools, including Colorado, and Oregon was one of the first ones. California, or I guess next I'll go to New Jersey, because that was 2009, and they require the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection to look at overburdened communities and the burdens that they have from 8 different types of facilities, including electricity generation facilities. In California, they also have an environmental justice task force, and they came up with the Cal Enviro Screen, which is called Enviro, but it's actually environmental and justice screening, where they help decision makers, policy makers, before they make a decision on something, they look at how this will impact BIPOC communities, so that includes Black and Indigenous and other people of color communities, low-income communities, and so that they can take that into consideration when they're doing their decision-making. We talked about Colorado, and also Washington has an Environmental Justice Council, and they also have a mapping tool, and they require state agencies to create and adopt community engagement plans. And so this is one of the things I was talking about before, where you want the people who are hosting electricity generation at the table from the very beginning when they're planning, because whatever it is going to be in their community, but they require that the stakeholder engagement in Washington.
Thank you. So we have some amazing questions. You guys are creative and good. But let's talk about technology in particular. Maybe Trent, we'll start with you, but others as well. What needs to be developed to decarbonize the economy? What do we still need? What are some of those emerging things that you have on your horizon? I'm sure others do too, but Trent, do you want to start?
Sure. That's such a big question. I would say off the top of my, look, we talked about the different industries. I think car electrification, transportation, electrifying transportation and net zero transportation, that's already happening, right? We're now just walking down the cost curve. So that's just going to take time. Renewable energy, electricity, we're now just walking down the curve for there as well. Can there be, real innovations like, safer micro nuclear, facilities? Sure. But, do we have to have those to get to where we need to go? Probably not. The next thing you think about is buildings. We probably have 90% of solutions we need for buildings, right? to get to net zero buildings, energy efficient buildings, mass timber buildings. So many of these solutions, I think, are just execution and deployment. Right now, we have a lot of these solutions. We just got to get them out. How do we get them out in an economic, financially positive and just way? I would say the one area that I think does require a lot more economic innovation to really drive down the cost is in carbon capture and sequestration, right? The idea that to take carbon out of the air, what we have already emitted or what we will be emitting, the cost of that is still relatively astronomical, right? So it's right now, I think the lowest cost groups out there for direct air capture is in the order of $1,000, right, per ton of capture. We need to get that down to $100 or less, maybe $50 or less. And so we're talking about an order of magnitude change. I would say that's one area that I'm really looking forward to seeing significant technology improvements.
Thanks. What about supply chain issues? Who wants to talk about that? We've got a lot of supply chain issues when it comes to batteries and development of things. Where are we stuck on that? What do we do is what people are asking.
You guys figure that out yet? Battery technology, I mean, Trent probably knows this better than anybody, but battery technology is really just getting started. And we need to figure out how to do it better. And we need to figure out how to do it so it's less invasive in our environment, basically. There's a cool project going on right now in the Salton Sea in California, which is if anybody's ever been there, it's this big nasty sea of salt, really. But there are many companies, including, for instance, Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett's company, and other companies that are trying to figure out how to essentially use that briny, salty stuff in the Salton Sea for battery technology now. And that's a huge deal. And in my really cool far out space age technology category, there's something called Phyto Mining. Has anybody ever heard of that? There's a book for sale in the back, and it has a little bit about Phyto Mining at the end. It's really cool stuff. Basically, on the island of Borneo right now, it's just fun to say that. On the island of Borneo right now, there are scientists and private companies that are working on ways to harvest ferns on the island these ferns actually absorb things like nickel, like cobalt. And so they're hopeful that they're going to be able to figure out ways to harvest and to replant and harvest again these big forests of ferns to get the cobalt and nickel and other heavy metals that we need for battery tech to build all the batteries we say we need to build. Is that going to be next year or the next couple of years? No, but a lot of people like Trent are investing in that kind of stuff. Plus, it's just kind of cool on the island of Borneo.
I like to go to Borneo.
I know. So I think we are holding people from more networking and asking specific questions. Great questions in here. I apologize, we are not getting to all of them, but I want to close out the panel with pulling on a couple themes from the questions I see here. Something that you said about finger pointing earlier and the idea of, again, who voted for the IRA bill, some of the polarization and political divide that we see on these issues, through the context and the lens of leadership, right? I mean, what do you envision? There's defeatism and doomism out there. I think about some of the conversations I have with even pretty young, up and coming folks in our day and age who have a lot of defeatism, a lot of doomism feelings about the future. I think, you know, this new passage, I'm hearing a lot of optimism here, but we do need to think about leadership, the next generation of leadership, and perhaps even reimagining leadership in this space. I mean, who wants to go? Give me a 30-second viewpoint on where you are seeing leadership and what gets you excited about reimagining leadership in this space.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one. I'm seeing leadership come from every direction. I like from the young to the old, every part of society, I think is starting to bring the focus that we need to get to the right spot. Think about this for a second. It is 9,990 days until 2050. We have to be net zero by 2050. It means every single person in this room, every single person you know, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, everybody's got to get involved. And we've got to have leadership from every single circle and do our part. And that's what I see happening. And I've got 2 young kids at home, they're 13 and 15, and they are fired up about this topic. And that is what it's going to take. Every single generation, every part of society figuring out their contribution. And I am super optimistic we're going to get there with 9,990 days to go.
Yeah, I think what I would say is there's a pathway there. We know what that pathway is, right? And I would just encourage, and I know, you know, a lot of times when you're just sitting there and watching the news, you know, the world seems to be going on fire and it's all doom and gloom. But I would just encourage everyone here to be out there leading and saying, we're doing this, right? You got to get out and do this. We know what we have to do. There's a set of steps and actions that we have to take to get from here to there. John Doerr, who's probably one of the most famous venture investors in the history of venture investing, just came out with a website that clearly lays out, you know, the 10 steps to getting to net zero by 2050. These are known facts, right? So I would just encourage, you know, action and leadership. So thank you for all the work you're doing.
I second that. Thank you. When I studied German literature, so I got to where I am today at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and we could not major in environmental studies, really, or minor in it because it wasn't a thing back then. I don't look that old either, I know, but one of my professors in an environmental studies class said to me when we were seniors and we were talking about where we were going, and he was asking everybody what they were going to do, and some people said, I'm going into finance, you know, sorry. And
I didn't study finance, so it's all good.
But he said, that's great. We need everybody. Every single job can be an environmental job, right? Every single job can be a justice job. He didn't say that back then, but that's what I'm saying now. Every single job can be a job that gets us to these goals where we want to be. And so just make whatever job it is that you have into that job, right? You're the person in your office that keeps bringing these things up, the inequities, or you keep bringing up I think we could recycle that or whatever it is. And maybe it's a little bit naggy, but really people will appreciate it in the end. And one last thing is that I will go and teach my kids classes, which they love, especially now that they're older. When mom comes in, but when my younger daughter was in 3rd grade, I was talking about wind power, and one kid in the class who's 8 years old, he said, couldn't we climb a mountain and put a wind machine up on top of a mountain? Because you know how when you climb a mountain, it's windier up there? And I was like, I want you, kid. I said it took 100 years for the scientists to figure this out, where we have like kite wind, right? We have wind that's on a kite that we can then take the electricity and transfer down here. But it was amazing. So I am also optimistic. I have a lot of hope. And I think the next generation, I can see some of you in the audience. You're not looking right now, but I can see some of you. I have hope and I have faith in you guys. Yes. Bob, wrap us up.
Well, yeah, I might wrap us up where we began, which is where we're talking about the intersection of climate change and the environment and the economy. And as we were talking about the economic damage when we first came together here. And the fact of the matter is, the economics of climate change has made this a pocketbook issue. And once something becomes a pocketbook issue, people start paying attention. These costs aren't something that's being borne in the Arctic. It's not being borne on some faraway Pacific island. These are costs that are hitting us. We had, whether it's wildfires in the West or so many hurricanes in the East that we ran out of names for them, drought and flooding in the Midwest. But the other thing is the flip side of the climatenomics coin, if I may, which is the economic benefits of climate action. And right now, those 3.2 million jobs in clean energy, we know that those are in every single state in the country. There's nothing partisan about that. These aren't red state jobs. They're not blue state jobs. They're red, white, and blue jobs. And I have to say, as the economic costs of climate change continue to be felt, whether it's in places like Kentucky and Dallas, which just faced 1,000-year flooding, and as the jobs for those clean energy jobs go to to states around the country, I think that's going to change some thinking. And right now, one of the places that we really see that is around electric vehicles. Electric vehicles were the fastest growing part of clean energy, the clean energy industry last year, up 26%. Guess where those jobs are going? Yes, some of them are going into Michigan and Ohio, but they're going to Kentucky. They're going to Tennessee. They're going to the Carolinas. They're going to Texas. And it's going to get harder for politicians, for everyday citizens to say, oh, that's some California crazy Colorado, New York thing when it comes to both the cost of climate change and the benefits of climate change, because it's impacting us all now. And that really gives me hope that this thing that has become a partisan issue, even though it has nothing to do with partisanism, can reset the thinking around climate change and, call me an optimist, but maybe heal some of the division in this country, period.
Thank you. All right, join me in thanking the panel, please. Love that. Thank you. Well, how nice to gather in person. And a huge thank you to those who joined us online. I know we're going to wrap up our virtual hybrid presentation. We can do this in 2022. People here, people all around the world tuning in to watch us tonight. So thank you all. I'm going to have Susan come here and say a few closing remarks. And I do want to say thank you to E2 for being a co-host and a co-partner in this. The Institute for Science and Policy was founded here at the museum in 2018 by our president and CEO, George Sparks. I started in 2019. They said we got to get some staff to do this, take this idea to life. And it's to have conversations like these to tackle wicked problems in society. And there's not easy answers. And I love the optimism and the hope that everyone brought here. So thank you for that. And I know I have some of my council members here today, some friends of the Institute, some supporters. So thank you all for also supporting the Institute and what you do. Those of you who don't know about us, want to learn more, you can come talk to me. There's some colleagues and museum colleagues here in the audience as well too. Definitely find one of us after today. Huge thank you to Susan. You've been wonderful to work with. Do you want to wrap us up? There you
Sorry.
go.
Well, thank you, Kristen. It's been wonderful to work with you, and thank you to all your staff. It's just a dream to work with you. All that I do is really show up after our months of planning.
Yeah.
But thank you all for being here. Bob said a little bit about E2. I'm the Mountain West advocate for E2 here in Colorado. I do some work in New Mexico and also Nevada. I have in the audience, there's a number of E2 members. My job is to help bring their voices to talk to our policymakers, both at the Capitol as well as agency, and talk about why the clean energy economy and this economic boom is important for not only your businesses, but what you see in the state. And so if you'd like to learn more about E2, we'd love to have you join us. If E2 members could raise their hand, you can talk to them too. And I'm so grateful for you to be here, and thank you so much for coming. It's really been a joy. It's been an excellent conversation, and thank you to all the panelists, and thank you, Bob, for coming.
Yeah, Bob will sign some books for those of you who want it. There is more food and drink out there and networking. So please join us out in the reception. I'm going to ask our speakers to head out there because I know they're going to get pinned with questions. So maybe head on out to the atrium and enjoy your evening. Thank you.